Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians conducted another hacker attack, cyber attack. The Armed Forces of Ukraine report Russian cyber attacks on the government and commercial sectors of Ukraine, including on the resources of the Ministry of Defense. There is also an attempt to gain access to personal and confidential user data. Also in the morning, Naftogaz, the company that controls the oil and gas in Ukraine, announced a large-scale hacker attack. And Ukrposhta, this is the mail service, and system Shlях are about a technical failure. Shlях is the system that Ukrainians use to cross the border and to leave Ukraine for some business or some different purposes for Ukraine army or something like this. These are very important updates because if you remember, a few weeks ago there was another report about cyber attack. As a result of the previous attack, the Ukrainian bank sector has almost fell down, and connection services as well. Furthermore, we got another very important update. Kiev has denied its readiness to extend the contract with Russia for gas transit through the territory of Ukraine. This is very important agreement and very important information because there are a few countries in the European Union who still have possibilities to get gas from Russia through Ukraine. And we are talking about the Slovakia and Hungary. And as you can see, because of that fact that there are few countries in the European Union like Slovakia and maybe it's just Slovakia and Hungary who support Russia in this conflict, who suggest Ukraine to give up, to give some territories to Russia, but to finish this war. And these are two countries that try to cancel and not to allow the European Union to send money to Ukraine. And as I understand, the Ukrainians denied this agreement because they just wanted basically to revenge these two countries, and probably this agreement was something like blackmail, blackmail reason for these countries. Very interesting situation. Now we're moving to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about Kharkiv. If you remember, yesterday, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians shot down the Russian Il-76, and today we got some details from French sources. According to France Info, that Il-76 was shot down by the United States Patriot system. And why I'm saying this, today we got a very interesting series of geolocations, and I'll remind you that according to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians attacked the Russian aircraft Il-76 from Liptsi, from this village along the border with Russia. And today we got a series of geolocations from Liptsi and other cities and villages in the area. And on this series of videos, we see how the Russians were counter-attacking or attacking the Ukrainian positions with Iskanders. Significant number of strikes, very heavy damage, and very likely that's one on this, since the Russians were trying to show us possible attack against the Ukrainian air defense system Patriot. Yet we haven't seen got any report from the Ministry of Defense about destroyed air defense system, but we have just these geolocations. Maybe the Russians haven't managed to destroy, but anyway, maybe they managed to destroy a warehouse with rockets, or maybe warehouses or temporary positions with the personnel and something like this. Now we are moving to Kupiansk, direction to Kupiansk area. We have few updates from this territory. During the previous night, the Russians made another attempt to attack Sinkovka. For those purposes, the Russians were using reconnaissance squad. They managed to enter the northern part to dig in deeper, but the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russians, and they started attacking and bombing the Russians with FPV drones. And as a result of FPV drone strikes, the Russians were defeated and lost the entire platoon. So that attack failed. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians start redeployment of brigades from strategical reserves, and we are talking about 115th Brigade. According to information we have, the Ukrainians were planning to complete creation of this brigade just in spring of 2024, by spring, but now we see that the situation is so terrible, so Ukrainians are forced to use unprepared brigades of strategical reserves on the ground. Now we are moving to Kupiansk, further to Kupiansk direction to Krakhmalnaya foothold. As you can see, during the previous few days we haven't received any updates from this territory. The Russians continue their digging in deep process in this area, trying to create long-term positions and to prepare the foothold before further offensive operation in direction of the villages like Kislovka-Kotlarovka fortification area, in direction of Pishane, Tabaevka, Berestova. For now, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians and the Ukrainians haven't reported any updates about the situation on the ground. But as I understand, tomorrow we're going to receive some numbers and some updates. Now we are moving to Liman direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates. According to information we have, the Ukrainians announced about, let's say, evacuation of few villages in the fields on Liman direction. The Ukrainians started evacuation in the forced evacuation in the villages like Redkadub, Nova and Lipova. Obviously, these buildings and this residential area will be filled by the Ukrainian soldiers who will be redeployed in this area, probably also from strategical reserves, with the purpose to repel attacks from the Russian side along Zhiribets River or something like this. Furthermore, according to some Ukrainian sources, pro-Ukrainian sources, the situation in Liman area is very difficult for the Ukrainians. According to these sources, the Ukrainians are about to lose the first village on Liman direction. The source haven't provided us any details what kind of the village the Ukrainians are about to lose. This might be Terny, Yampolovka or even Makievka, but according to this source, soon we're going to receive the first updates about the first village captured by the Russians on Liman direction since the beginning of the Russian counter-offensive operation. Also, we got very interesting report and update from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. According to them, as a result of clashes on this area, the Ukrainians lost 270 soldiers and pay attention, 32 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks. And this is very important and big number, 32 armored vehicles. The Ukrainians lost 2 tanks, 2 armored personnel carriers and 2 fighting armored machines. So just heavy tanks, not like cars, vehicles or support machines, just armored vehicles. And on this video, for example, we saw another Russian attack, how the Russians were trying to get and to storm this area. According to some more or less reliable sources from the Russian side, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to enter and to establish control over this territory. Very important advance, because the Russians entered this forest and now they will continue moving along this forest in direction of Zhiribets. The distance between these edge Russian positions and river itself is around 4 kilometers. So now the Russians even have possibilities to attack this territory from tanks. They don't need even to use artillery. The Ukrainian sources tried to counterattack the Russians, and today they published the video of FPV drone strikes against the concentration of Russian forces along this tree line. If you remember, just yesterday we discussed the video how the Ukrainian 3 tanks were counterattacking the Russian positions in the same area. 3 Ukrainian T-72 were attacking the tree lines, and when they were empty, they took a decision to leave this area. And today we got the video of concentration of Russian armored vehicles along the same tree line with the purpose to continue offensive operation further and to continue the assault operation against the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Yampolovka. This is very important update and very heavy losses from the Ukrainian side. I believe that tomorrow and the day after we're going to receive more updates and probably additional progress of the Russian forces in direction of these forest belts. Now we are moving to Liman. We have very interesting updates from this territory as well. As a result of Russian offensive operation along the Seversky Donetsk River, the Russians managed to establish control over this industrial area, over these buildings, and we have geolocated confirmation of that. That video was published by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were showing how their FPV drone was flying above this territory and was bombing the Russian forces. So we will not watch this video due to significant number of casualties and violence, so we can't do this. So but anyway, this video confirms the Russian progress and that the Russians captured this territory. Also, the Russian military expert Ryber confirms about further Russian progress along Seversky Donetsk River, but on, let's say, Kremenная forest side. And according to information we have, the Russians are about to start the landing and storming operation of Belogorovka from 4 directions. The first direction is from, let's say, Kremenная forest. This might be the first direction. The Russians got as close as possible to Seversky Donetsk River. The Russians will try to attack the same area, let's say, from this direction. Also, the Russians during the previous weeks established control over this industrial area, and they're about to start offensive offensive operation. And according to information we have, the Russians launched artillery preparation and bombing the Ukrainian positions to the south of Belogorovka, which also confirms and give us some understanding that this area might be very likely. This area is also going to be another Russian road of attack. So as you can see, based on all these geolocations, the Russians will try to encircle the positions of 81st Air Mobile Brigade from 4 directions with the purpose to completely collapse this territory, maybe even to encircle Ukrainians, and after that to continue movements in direction of Grigorovka and in direction, of course, of Serebryanka and Siversk, with the purpose to cut the Ukrainian support in Kremenna forest from the south and to completely collapse the Ukrainian forces in the Ukrainian defense belt between Yampolovka, Yampol, Dronovka and Dibrova. So the battle, very heavy battle in this area, is about to start. When talking about the southern Siversk direction, about Solidar, we haven't received anything from this territory. The only update we got is that the commanders and the commanders of officers staff of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade died as a result of Russian Iskander or missile strike that took place on the 21st of January. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction. As you can see, we have significant number of geolocations and updates, and the most important are coming from Bogdanovka. The Russians continue storming the central part of the village. As you know, lots of sources reported that the Russians have already bypassed the central part of Avdiivka, and currently the Russians, according to many sources, are storming the southwestern part, but all those talks just speculations. The Russians still haven't managed to bypass the central part, and we have another evidence of the Russian attempts to clear this territory with FPV drone strikes. We have a lot of geolocations, lots of strikes with this type of weapon, and the process is very long and very difficult because there are Ukrainian forces on the hill. There are a lot of let's say buildings that Ukrainians use as temporary positions, and to understand the situation better, we need to increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of this month, and we're gonna see the Russian focus. The Russian focus show us that the Russians are somewhere here along this line, and they still need probably a few days to continue the clearing operation of the central part. But obviously, even according to these videos, we see that most of the buildings was already reduced to ruins, so just few days of FPV drone strikes and the Russians will be able to enter the central part. So within the next 2 days, I believe we need to expect some updates about further Russian progress inside of the central part of Bogdanovka. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions with FPV drones and Lancets along the tree lines on the northern fortification area, but their focus is less concentrated than in comparison with the central part of Bogdanovka, which confirms that the Russians are still very far from this, from approaching and getting the goals of this area. Furthermore, the Russians established complete Lancet control over Chasov Yar and the main roads that Ukrainians use to supply and support their forces. On this video we see another Lancet strike. As a result of that strike, the Ukrainians lost another tank and another artillery system. So this area is under complete Russian control. For better understanding of Russian superiority, of course, first of all we need to increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of the let's say even months. We see complete Russian superiority, a significant number of Lancet strikes, significant number of destroyed artillery systems, artillery forces, tanks, and many ammo depots and so on. So there are no chances for the Ukrainians to hold this territory for a very long period of time. Also, the Russians continue attempts to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt and to crack the Ukrainian net between Bogdanovka and the new cemetery. This defense belt is very powerful stronghold. The Russians continue storming this area using FPV drones, and we have more geolocated confirmations of more attempts from the Russian side to destroy the Ukrainian positions, but yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of the beginning of the ground operation on this direction. So furthermore, we don't have any geolocated updates of Russian control over the new cemetery. So as I understand, this is approximately the areas of controls by the Russians and the Ukrainians. Now we are moving to Ivanovsk, and we got a lot of very interesting and important details. First of all, the Russians start bombing and attacking Ivanovsk with TOS flamethrower systems. To tell the truth, I don't remember when the last time the Russians were using these heavy artillery systems against the city. Probably the last time the Russians were bombing Ivanovsk took place maybe even during the Wagner storm of Bakhmut, when the Russians were trying to suppress and destroy the Ukrainian reserves and reinforcement. And now the Russians renews those attacks, and you see that the number of these attacks is very heavy. The Russians completely covered this area with artillery strikes, and the main question, what is the main purpose of the Russian attacks in this area? And today, to get the answer to this question, we need to take a look at this satellite picture of the tree lines that goes from Ivanovska to Klishchevka. This is the satellite image of the area. You see the three cities, Ivanovska, Klishchevka, and Bakhmut, and pay attention to this, let's say, black line, like number T. This is black line, this one, and this is the tree line that connects, let's say, 215 Hill and Ivanovska itself. So we are talking on the satellite, we were pointing our attention to this area. And if we take a look at this picture once again, you're gonna see that all these black dots is just signs of artillery strikes. So basically this picture confirms that either the Russians or the Ukrainians are attacking each other exactly along this tree line. If you remember, a few days ago, on the 21st of January, we got the first confirmation that the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt to establish control over the X stronghold and to enter this territory. We got geolocations of that. So basically, the Russians entered this tree line, and very likely that the satellite picture show us the work of artillery forces of Ukrainian artillery forces, and the Ukrainians were attacking the offensive Russian squads that are moving along these tree lines in direction of Ivanovska. So still we haven't received any geolocated confirmations or any updates from the sources on the ground, but these TOS flamethrower strikes in Ivanovska itself and the view of this picture of this road between Ivanovska and 215.7 Hill tell us that the Russians launched and began the ground operation in Ivanovska itself. So very likely that on the 25th of January, the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, launched official storming and ground operation against Ivanovska. Very likely the Russians currently maybe the Russians have already entered this village. So everything, at least to me, everything tells that this is exactly what happens right now on this direction. So we'll follow the situation to get more updates. More details we're getting from 215.7 Hill. On this video we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in these tree lines, which confirms that the Russians don't have control over entire stronghold, and that some part of the stronghold either under Ukrainian or in the gray zone. So we will adjust the map before the next video, and we will color this territory as a gray zone. Very likely this territory maybe even on the Ukrainians. Now we are moving further to Avdiivka direction. We have a lot of updates from this territory as well. According to Russians, the Russians launched an offensive operation, another offensive operation in Stepova, and as a result of that attack, they managed to bypass the Stepova and to enter the next defense belt and started clashes for this stronghold that located to the west of the village. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation, just talks and messages in X and Telegram, and for now no confirmation. So let's wait more. And when talking about Avdiivka itself, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation provided us additional very interesting numbers. According to the Russians, as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost significant number of soldiers, around 310. The Ukrainians lost around 15 armored vehicles, including 4 tanks and 7 artillery systems. So as you can see today, the previous 24 hours was very powerful, was very heavy for the Ukrainians. There were very powerful clashes all over the line of combat contact, and now we got the, let's say, consequences of those clashes. And the most important part that today we got for the first time since the battle, since the beginning or ending of Pipeline Russian special operation, the first geolocations that the Russians managed to advance and to establish control over the northwestern part of the southern part of Avdiivka. There are geolocations from this territory. The geolocations we got from the Ukrainian sources, and this is very important video. Let's take a look at this video. The Ukrainians launched their counter-offensive operation, and this video was made on the 21st of January, so basically from 4 days ago. On this video we see how the Ukrainians 116th Mechanized Brigade sent few tanks to counter-attack the Russian positions inside of the village, along the Saborная, Sportivная, Chernyshevskaya Street. One tank started movements on the southern area, Chernyshevskaya Street, and the second tank was moving along Sportivная Street. But at some point both tanks stopped and started running away. There are a few things that that you need to pay attention to note. First of all, take a look at this area and just take a look that the Ukrainian tanks were started at the beginning of these streets, not like somewhere in the central part or in the vicinity of Tsarskaya Okhota fortification, just at the beginning. The second thing you need to pay attention to is that the buildings located are very close to each other, and that there are no possibilities to move 2 or 3 tanks, and basically the Ukrainian tanks can't even turn around. They can move just forward and back, let's say, along the same line. And the final important thing that you need to pay attention to, the Ukrainian tanks were attacking not somewhere, let's say, in 5-6 kilometers ahead. The Ukrainians were destroying the buildings in 2-3 meters around them. So what did happen? The Ukrainians, as we discussed, the Russians managed to establish the foothold in this area. They captured the Ukrainian positions, made a special pipeline operation, and they were waiting when the Ukrainians start sending the reinforcement in this area to create an ambush for them. And the Ukrainians on the 21st of January sent 116th Brigade sent 2 tanks. One of the tanks entered Chernyshevskovo Street, and the Ukrainian tank got this area. So this was the final point of the trip of the first tank. The second tank was moving along Sportivnaya Street, and the second tank got this area. At these points, the Ukrainian tanks for some reason start bombing and attacking and destroying and reducing to ruins the buildings around them. And after a few minutes of clashes, the Ukrainians took a decision to turn around, to turn back, and basically to run away from this territory. That was the road of the first tank, and let's say that was the road of the second tank. And that's it. So first tank got this area, the second tank got this area. After that, the Russians started attacking them. So as I understand, the Russians were trying to make an ambush, and the Russians were trying to allow the Ukrainians get as deep as possible along Chernyshevskovo and along Sportivnaya Street, and to destroy them somewhere in the central part of this area. But maybe those Ukrainian tanks had the thieves feeling, and they realized that something went wrong, and they took a decision not to go deep inside, and they basically ran away from this area. This geolocated video give us possibility and, let's say, the right to correct the map and to color this territory completely into red color, which confirms the Russian progress and Russian control above this territory. So this area is under complete. Maybe these few buildings in the beginning of Sabornaya and Chernyshevskovo streets are not under Russian control, but either not under Ukraine control. It's in the gray zone, as I understand. Anyway, we see the further Russian progress. Don't forget that this area, this residential area that is under Russian control, is located on the hill. And everything, let's say, along Turgenev Street, Zeleny Street, Nekrasov Street, so everything to the north from this area is in the lowland. So basically, the Ukrainians don't have chances and possibilities to attack something like this. First of all, they can't attack using tanks on armored vehicles. If they want to move like this, they need to use infantry. And obviously, the Russians controls this hill, and the Ukrainians will lose everything if they start, or at least they're gonna have significant losses during possible attacks from this direction. So the situation for the Ukrainians develops very bad. We start receiving the videos of how the Russians captured significant number of forces of 110th Brigade. Just for the previous few days, we received at least 2 or 3 videos of the same type, a lot of prisoners of war, and interesting updates are coming also from a former air defense base. According to the Ukrainians, this former air defense base still under Ukraine control. They're saying that the Russians managed to enter the base. There were very heavy clashes, but probably the Russians took a decision to withdraw and to retreat or to step back. But the Ukrainians confirms that very likely that the Ukrainians will be forced to retreat from this territory because of very difficult, let's say, of defending this territory. But the Russians continue staying on their position that former aviation base is under complete Russian control, and that Ukrainians controls just Cheburashka stronghold. So this territory is covered with fog of war, but for now we're not going to change anything. Furthermore, I'll remind you that according to the Ukrainian sources, the Russians have concentrated and regrouped around 40,000 soldiers, and during the next few days they're about to start the final storm of Avdiivka, which will completely collapse the Ukrainian defense belt, encircle Avdiivka, and deal significant defeat to the entire Ukrainian army. Also, we got another very interesting update from Russia. I have added this icon above Donetsk because, as I understand, maybe this situation was discovered somewhere here. On this video, you can see Baba Yaga drone with anti-tank equipment on board. Very interesting equipment, very interesting video. For example, this equipment can attack tanks on the fly. So this equipment can easily change Ki-52 helicopters, which the main purpose is to do the same. And from one side, these scenes can be very funny for us, but to my opinion, I'll give you my opinion that this is exactly how this war, how the special military operation is going to be ended. If special military operation is going to continue for the next year or maybe for the next 2 years, obviously if the Russians will continue their offensive operation, obviously the next strongholds and cities will be stormed and attacked by equipment something like this. It's a perfect weapon. You can destroy tanks, anything you want. You can attack armored vehicles and strongholds from appropriate angle and from different positions. Very powerful and very interesting idea. Now we are moving to Marinka area. We have received updates today about the Russian attack in Krasnogorovka, but still we haven't received any geolocated proofs of that. Furthermore, the Ukrainians published the video of FPV drone strikes against the Russian positions on the northeastern part of Novomikhailivka, which we can use as additional confirmation of Russian control of these fields. Now we don't have any updates about any clashes on the ground. When talking about Rabotina area, we got some geolocations of renewing of Russian attacks in the vicinity of Verbova. The Russians are pushing from the south in direction of the fields, trying to cut this territory in two parts, and the Russians published significant number of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian positions in the fields. We will not watch this video due to the violence on them. Now we are moving to Kherson direction. The Russians continued their offensive, including operation of Krynki itself. Today we also got some geolocations from this part. We will adjust the map due to these geolocations. As I understand, the Russians managed to improve their positions, something like this. For now, there are almost no territories that are under Ukraine control, but there are a lot of FPV drones that are coming here from the Ukrainian bank of the river, and that don't allow the Russians to establish complete control over the village. Every time the Russians start movement, drones comes and attack the Russians. So this is the situation in this area. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainians all over the Dnipro River with the FABs. Today we got another series of FAB strikes, and we see that the Russians don't have any problems to use FABs and aviation in this area, which confirms that very likely the Russians managed to completely suppress Ukraine air defense, or maybe the Ukrainians redeployed their air defense somewhere in Kharkiv and maybe somewhere else. But anyway, recently we stopped receiving any updates about Ukraine air defense or some, let's say, achievements of this type of weapon. Furthermore, during the previous night, the Russians published the video. Another important update. Yes, the Ukrainians published the video of FPV drone strikes against the Russian boats somewhere, not somewhere, this video was geolocated, how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians among these islands, which confirms, this attack confirms that very likely that the Russians controls all these islands, at least in this part of Dnipro River. Very interesting update that shows that most of the islands are under the Russians. And we got updates from Odessa. During the previous night, the Russians attacked Odessa with Geran drones. We got a lot of geolocated videos of explosions and so on. But the Ukrainians also attacked the Russian territory of Russian Federation. The Ukrainians launched their drone in the area of Tuapse, and as a result of attack, they managed to damage and set on fire the Tuapse oil refinery, which is also something unusual for the Ukrainians. Their possibility to use long-range drones and that can fly so far from Ukraine above the concentration of main Russian fleet in the Novorossiysk and main Russian air defense areas. So very interesting attack. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.